I'll put it on the screen.
Krishna.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 We're reading from chapter 1, text 40. Adharma,
Adharma,
Abhibhavat,
Abhibhavat,
Krishna,
Krishna,
Pradusyanti,
Karushyanti,
Kulastriyaha,
Ulasriya,
Strishu,
Strishu,
Dushtasu,
Dushtasu,
Varshneya,
Varshnaya,
Jayate,
Jayate,
Varnasankara,
Varnasankara,
Dharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Pradusyanti Kulastriyaha,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya,
Strishu Dustasu Varshneya,
Strishu Dushtasu Varshnaya,
Jayate Varna Shankara,
Jayate Varnasankara,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya,
Strishu Dustasu Varshneya,
Strishu Dushtasu Varshnaya,
Jayate Varna Shankara,
Jayate Varnasankara,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya,
Strishu Dustasu Varshneya,
Strishu Dushtasu Varshnaya,
Jayate Varna Sankara,
Jayate Varnasankara, Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya,
Strishu Dushtasu Varshnaya,
Strishu Dushtasu Varshnaya,
Jayate Varnasankara,
Jayate Varnasankara. Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya, Pradusyanti Kulastriya, Strishu Dushta Prashna Varshneya,
Strishu Dushtasu Varshnaya,
Jayate Varnasankara,
Jayate Varnasankara,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Adharma Bhibhavat Krishna,
Pradusyanti Kulastriya,
Kadushanti Striyaha
Steshu Dusta Suvarshneya
Strishu Dushta Suvarshnaya
Jayate Vana Shankara
Jayate Varna Sankara
Adharma Vibhavat Krishna
Dharma Viva Krishna
Pradushanti Kulastriya
Pradushanti Kulastriya
Strishu Dustashu Varshneya
Vishuddha Suvarshneya
Jayate Varna Sankara
Jayate Varna Sankara
Adharma Vibhavat Krishna
Adharma Vibhavat Krishna
Pradushanti Kulastriyaha
Pradushanti Kulastriya
Strishu Dushta Suvarshneya
Strishu Dustashu Varshneya
Jayate Varna Sankara
Jayate Varna Sankara
Adharma Viva Krishna
Adharma Vibhavat Krishna
Pradushanti Kulastriya
Pradushanti Kulastriya
Sri Dusta Suvarshneya
Strishu Dushta Suvarshneya
Jayate Varna Sankara
Jayate Varna Sankara
Adharma.
Adharma
Thank you. Adharma.
Adharma,
Irreligion.
Religion
Abhibhavat.
Bhagavad,
Having been predominant.
having been predominant.
Krishna.
Krishna,
O Krishna.
oh Krishna,
Pradyusyanti.
Pradushanti,
Become polluted.
become polluted.
Kulastriyaha.
Kulastriya,
Family ladies.
family ladies.
Strishu.
Strishu,
Of the womanhood.
of the womanhood.
Dushtasu.
Dushtasu,
Being so polluted.
being so polluted.
Varshneya.
Varshnaya,
O descendant of Vrishni.
O descendant of Krishna.
Jayate.
Jayate,
It so becomes.
it so becomes.
Varna Sankaraha.
Varna Sankara,
Unwanted progeny.
unwanted progeny.
Translation. When irreligion is prominent in the family, O Krishna, the women of the family become corrupt, and from the degradation of womanhood, O descendant of Vrishni, comes unwanted progeny. Purport by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Good population in human society is a basic principle for peace, prosperity, and spiritual progress in life. The Varnashram religion's principles were so designed that the good population would prevail in society for the general spiritual progress of state and community. Such population depends on the chastity and faithfulness of its womanhood. As children are very prone to be misled, women are similarly very prone to degradation. Therefore, both children and women require protection by the elder members of the family. By being engaged in various religious practices, women will not be misled into adultery. According to Chanakya Pandit, women are generally not very intelligent and therefore not trustworthy. So the different family traditions of religious activities should always engage them, and thus their chastity and devotion will give birth to a good population eligible for participating in the Varnashram system. On the failure of such Varnashram dharma, naturally the women become free to act and mix with men, and thus adultery is indulged in at the risk of unwanted population. Irresponsible men also provoke adultery in society, and thus unwanted children fled the human race at the risk of war and pestilence. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Ragvanitam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Sabhadutam Parijanam Sahinam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakambitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopesha Kopika Kanta Radhakanta Namostute Tapta Kanchara Gaurange Radhe Vrinda Vaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Ajnana Timiran Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nivishesha Sunyavari Pachata Deshatarine. If you just give me a minute, I'm going to get my notes up here. So I'm leading class today because tomorrow's my birthday, and astrologically, I think technically today is my birthday, that at 10:20 today, the sun will be in the position it was, in the degree it was the moment I was born. And I did a session with Nalini Kanta Prabhu, and he, for like the next year, what to expect. And it seems like this next year I can expect like this, either like, there's like this dual nature of this next year where I could be either like challenged in my spiritual life from the association with rakshasas, like materialistic people, or the like flip side of that is I could be strengthened by like teaching to materialistic people, educating, like bringing materialistic people closer to Krishna. And it's really, obviously it's based on my choices. And so I thought it would be a really strong way to begin to like end this previous year and begin this next year with leading class and setting the precedent, the energy that I want to be in for this next year. And I'm literally in this like liminal space, this transitionary space between this last year and this next one. So it just feels right to give class. And I picked probably like the most triggering verse for most women in like the whole Bhagavad Gita to give class on. And it's because I've had so much realizations around this verse, particularly the past 2 years and especially the past few months. And interestingly, when I first read this verse, which was when I was doing a Bhagavad Gita class with Dear Govinda in January 2015, and this verse really, really pissed me off. And I wrote this like long email to all the people in the class about why I thought this wasn't accurate and like why men and women are like more similar than they're different. And I actually pulled up the email last night to see if I could find it, and I did. And I wrote this long, like very academic email as to why I didn't agree with that verse. But then interestingly enough, now today I agree with it a lot. And but I think it can be easy to misunderstand. And so part of my inspiration right now with this verse and in my life in general is taking what the guidance that Srila Prabhupada gave us, particularly for women, like me being a spirit soul in a woman body, and trying to guide other women to like have more Brahminical qualities and live, to come closer to Krishna, and to live more in a mood of reverence, like really revering themselves. So, so that's my inspiration for giving this class. And I think there's so much wisdom in understanding what Prabhupada is saying here for women. And I think it's just the way that he writes it, it can be hard for most women to receive and understand, but I think there's a way to translate it where it's very receivable and very helpful. So if the men today don't mind, I'm going to be talking a lot about more the woman experience, but at the end I will talk a little bit about what Prabhupada gave about the spirit, soul, and a man body experience. So Prabhupada says in this verse, women are generally not very intelligent and therefore not trustworthy. So what does Prabhupada mean when he says intelligence? And there's different kinds of intelligence. There's intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, artistic intelligence. And so what kind of intelligence is Prabhupada referring to here? Is he saying like all around that women in all these areas are not intelligent, or is he speaking about a particular one? And I went to Dear Govinda's yesterday to pick up the Shikshamrita so I could read that section about what Prabhupada gives to women. And I have a bunch of quotes from him. So there's one quote where he says, "Now I see that in our society, the girls are more intelligent than the boys." So that's interesting. So what kind of intelligence is he speaking about there? I think he might be in that part speaking about spiritual intelligence, though I'm not 100% sure. And then in another quote, he says, "Women by nature are endowed with many artistic tendencies, and from the Vedic age, we find that high-grade women and girls were highly qualified in 64 arts." So there he's speaking about the artistic intelligence, the innate artistic intelligence of spirit, souls, and women bodies. So I think what he's referring to when he's saying women are unintelligent is emotional intelligence. And the way that I interpret that is that women are, that we have soft hearts. And I think that's a way to translate it, that women can understand more easily, that women tend to have soft hearts. Prabhupada says, girls and women are generally very soft-hearted and they take things very easily, but then there is also a chance of being misled. So there's this dual nature, this double-edged sword of this soft heart. On one hand, it makes our hearts more pliable and like ready to surrender to Krishna. And that's really beautiful. And like for a woman, spirit, soul, and a woman body, it's easier to surrender usually to Krishna. It's like for a woman to surrender to this masculine God is easier than for a man to surrender to this masculine God. And then at the same time, the other edge of that sword is that we can be misled because the soft can be so hard. The heart can be so soft. It can be easy to maybe we trust too easily, or we get covered over by our soft-hearted nature when we disconnect from our intelligence because of that. And in this purport, Prabhupada says, as children are very prone to be misled, women are similarly very prone to degradation. Therefore, both children and women require protection by the elder members of the family. So that women need protection because we have that soft-hearted nature. And in Kali Yuga, the large majority of women, the very, very large majority of women are not protected. It's quite the opposite. It's a very degraded age, and women were degrading ourselves, not valuing ourselves, and being very misled. And so I think this verse is so important for a woman, because if we don't understand the vehicle that we have, this soft-hearted nature, then we're vulnerable, and we don't know that we need protection, and then we don't protect ourselves, and then we get very lost and misled. So knowing that we have this soft heart, knowing that the vehicle has a soft heart and that it needs protection, that gives us the power of awareness that we need to protect ourselves, to shelter our sensitive hearts. And then Prabhupada says, on the failure of such varnashram dharma, naturally the women become free to act and mix with men, and thus adultery is indulged in at the risk of unwanted population. I'm going to read that again. On the failure of such varnashram dharma, naturally the women become free to act and mix with men, and thus adultery is indulged in at the risk of unwanted population. So in the spiritual world, the divine feminine, Radharani, is the Ladini Shakti, the pleasure potency of Krishna. So the divine feminine is the potency, and then the divine masculine is the potent, or the divine feminine is the energy, and then the divine masculine is the energetic, or the divine feminine is the power, and Krishna is the powerful. And so in the material world, because the material world is a perverted reflection of the spiritual world, the perverted reflection of the pleasure potency is that like women are the pleasure potency of the material world. And if that pleasure potency is not like kept in check, then it can lead to like the senses of the world can become unrestrained, and very much are. That is exactly what's happening. Women are very, very beautiful. Like women tend to be very beautiful to look at. And there's a lot of power that comes with that. And a power that's so big that it could actually consume us and the world if we don't be mindful with how we use that power. And I personally feel like this power is a privilege. And I think that's essentially what Prabhupada is saying here. Like, it's easy to misunderstand in this verse and think that Prabhupada is saying that, like, kind of just blaming it all on the women, but it's actually like a role and a privilege that we have to protect society by being private with our pleasure potency, by being protective of that. And to do that, to not like be like spilling our pleasure potency everywhere, it requires that we are secure enough in ourselves that we don't need that kind of attention. And the only way to be secure in that way is to take shelter in Krishna ultimately. Prabhupada, in a lot in this Shikshamrita section, he says often that he repeatedly makes this clarification that in Krishna consciousness there's no distinction between boys and girls, that like we're spirit souls, that's really who we are, and there's no distinction. And there's a story of I've listened to the audiobook of the autobiography of Yamuna Devi, and she writes about this story of her and Prabhupada, where she is in the car with Srila Prabhupada. He's in the front seat, she's in the back seat, and occasionally he says, he's like in mid-conversation, he says, but that's because women are unintelligent, right? And he turns around and he like looks over at Yamuna to kind of like tease her, it seems. And she's so submissive. She says like, yes, Srila Prabhupada, women are unintelligent. And then the conversation goes on, and then he like goes back to the same point and he says the same thing, because women are unintelligent. And he looks over at Yamuna to see how she responds. And once again, she's just surrendered and submissive. And she says, yes. And then I think it goes on maybe one more time. And then he says, he turns around and he looks at her and he says, but you're not a woman, you're a Vaishnava. And that distinction, I think, is really important, that that we remember that we're not women, we're not men, we're Vaishnavis and Vaishnavas. And we can choose to be Vaishnavis, or we can choose to be women. We can choose to be men, or we can choose to be Vaishnavas. And when we choose to be Vaishnavas, we step out of the limitations of the vehicle that we're in. When women choose to be Vaishnavis, we step out of the limitation of our subtle body, of our soft hearts. In a letter to Krishna Devi, Prabhupada writes, yes, a woman can certainly reach the perfectional stage of devotion to Krishna. And then in another letter, he says, women are meant for advancing in devotion, that they're meant for advancing in devotion. I thought that was really powerful. So we have the gift, women have the gift of advancing in Krishna consciousness because our hearts are so soft and simple. And it's much easier for us to surrender. But then also there's that double-edged sword where we can be really misled. In the purport, Prabhupada says, the good population would prevail in society for the general spiritual progress of state and community. Such population depends on the chastity and faithfulness of its womanhood. Such population depends on the chastity and faithfulness of its womanhood. So we have a huge responsibility as women in society, which is to protect the world essentially by being protective with our pleasure potency, with our Shakti, with our beauty, not carelessly flaunting it around. And it's not because this is something to be ashamed of. It's not because our pleasure potency is something to be ashamed of. It's because it's really, really, really powerful. So powerful that it can be dangerous. Prabhupada says they are a great dangerous allurement to the young boys. He's talking about women. So in a conversation that I was having with Anandini and Rebecca and Anne a few weeks ago, we were talking about this, and Anandini was saying how she used the words that women are the guardians of consciousness, the guardians of consciousness of society. And I really believe that, and I love that. It's really inspiring. It feels like such a privilege that like we get to be the guardians of consciousness of our domains, of like the world, society, of the home, of relationships. And I think this is not something that we should take lightly, that it's a huge responsibility. So what I was wondering, and what I was wanting to find in what Srila Prabhupada gave us, is how does a Vaishnavi honor that role? How does a woman honor that role in privilege as the guardian of consciousness in society? Where does a Vaishnavi's power come from? And so I've been kind of collecting little bits of pieces of what I found Prabhupada has said on this. So what my understanding is that Prabhupada recommends, like, that his instruction to women is that we are surrendered, chaste, and shy, which is an interesting combination of qualities. That these are basically, in other words, like the superpowers of a Krishna conscious woman. But this is where a woman derives her power from. So surrender, I mean, the first and foremost, the most important thing is complete surrender to Krishna. Complete surrender to Krishna. And this is how we transcend the limitations of our soft hearts. And there's so many stories of these elevated Vaishnavis, these elevated Krishna conscious women. So there's a story of Queen Kunti. And so she was the aunt of Krishna, and so he would, because she was technically his elder, he would take the dust of her feet. But because she was so submissive, she prayed, Krishna, you are meant to be understood by the Paramahamsas, the most advanced transcendentalists, but I am a woman, so how can I see you? And then Prabhupada says, although Kunti had the body of a woman, she was a devotee. Therefore, she was not like any ordinary unintelligent woman. Rather, she was the most intelligent, for she recognized Krishna to be the supreme Godhead. So she was the most intelligent. And so this is how we can gain access to our ultimate intelligence, is by completely taking shelter in Krishna, knowing Krishna is the supreme God, the goal of all goals, the cause of all causes. And then that is where the source of all of our power comes from, and it requires that surrender. And then the other element of surrender is surrender to husband. Prabhupada writes in a letter to Naishkarmi Devidasi that, thus, if a girl gets a good husband, one who has accepted a bona fide spiritual master and is firmly fixed up in his service, automatically the wife of such a good husband inherits all of the benefits of his spiritual advancement. So you are very fortunate. Go on in this present attitude, serve your husband always, And in this way, your life will be perfect, and together husband and wife will go back home, back to Godhead. So a woman can become perfect by serving her Krishna conscious husband in a mood of complete surrender. And this spirit of surrender is the strongest place that a woman can be in her relationship with her husband. And I've been, for the past month, really educating myself on man and woman dynamics, masculine and feminine polarity in relationship. And it seems like even in these different, how do I say, like, where these different sources that I'm learning this information from, it says the same thing, basically, that a woman, that a feminine woman, like, her safest, most secure position is in a spirit of complete surrender. And that's where a woman is ultimately happiest, safest, most secure. And I think that's really hard for most women today, because in like modern women, we kind of have trained ourselves to be very independent and autonomous, like these more masculine qualities. I know that's true for myself. And so the surrender can actually be, even though for a woman it's easier to surrender than a man, the surrender can still be hard, particularly I find in a relationship. And there's so many these really beautiful personalities that we can look to for inspiration of what this looks like. So there's Gandhari, the wife of Dhritarashtra, and Prabhupada called her the ideal chaste lady in the history of the world. And he called her that, I believe, because when she discovered that she was going to marry Dhritarashtra, who was blind, she blinded herself by putting these like a blindfold on, basically, so that she would not be in like a higher position than her husband. And that's such a like unbelievable mood of surrender. And it makes sense to me, like, if she didn't do that, then she would be in this higher position than her husband. And then it would be, I imagine it would be harder for her to surrender. And so like that helped her be in this, I mean, it was just a sign of her chastity and her surrender. And that's a sign of strength for a woman, that surrender. And then there's the example of Sita, that when Lord Ramachandra went to the forest, she chose to go with him. So she chose to like leave behind the comfortable life and go with him. So this surrender is where a woman's power comes from. But I like the example of Mother Janava, like it was recently the appearance day of Sita Devi and Mother Janava, the wife of Lord Nityananda, because she's an example of how, like, yes, surrender is our position, and it's not to be confused with weakness. It's not to be confused with particularly weakness in spiritual life. There's a conversation between Prabhupada and his disciples where Prabhupada says, so a crazy man's statement is not accepted. Child statement, crazy man's statement, unauthorized person statement, blind man's statement, we cannot accept. And then one of his disciples asks, basically, what about a woman's statement? And Prabhupada says, if a woman is perfect in Krishna consciousness, just like Janava Devi, Lord Nityananda's wife, she was Acharya. She was controlling the whole Vaishnava community, the whole Gaudiya Vaishnava community. And he goes on to say, it is not that women cannot become Acharya. Generally, they do not become, in very special case, but Janava Devi was accepted as, but she did not declare. So she was an Acharya. And so she was a very strong leader in the Krishna consciousness movement. And she's like this example of a woman being surrendered to her husband in a mood of surrender, and then at the same time being fierce with spiritual life. There's this, and this is thanks to Anandini that I have these. She posted this on Facebook, these prayers to Janava Devi by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It goes, O Janava Devi, by the power of your divine qualities, be merciful to this servant of yours. Dispel this illusion which torments me, and relieve me of material existence. Let me take shelter at your lotus feet. You are Nityananda Shakti, the divine energy of Lord Nityananda himself. You are the guru of Krishna Bhakti. Be merciful to me, and grant me the shade of your lotus feet, which are like a desire tree. You have delivered countless abominable sinners. Please deliver me in the same way. Today, praying for your mercy, this lowly sinner falls at your holy feet. So that shows, like, you know, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, one of our acharyas, is praying to the lotus feet of a woman acharya. So the surrender is not to be confused with weakness in spiritual life. So that's surrender. And then chastity is the second quality. So when I looked up the definition of chastity in Google, it basically said like refraining from sex. And that's true. And then also I think there's a more like a broader definition, or a more comprehensive definition, which for me is that like that chastity is a way of being, and it's a way of being where one's energy, particularly one's pleasure potency, is contained. It's not like spilling outward. And I was speaking with Bhakti Lata, my friend Bhakti Lata, maybe like a month ago now. And she was saying chastity is a process, not an action. And I'm still trying to understand what she meant by that. But the way that I interpret it is that chastity is a way of being. It's a way of being. It's not like something we do as much as it's a way that we live, an energy that we live in. And it basically means protecting our potency, because we have soft hearts, keeping that energy within, not letting it wildly pour out of us. So women are meant to be protected, and there's a purport in the Srimad Bhagavatam where Prabhupada says the protection of women maintains the chastity of society, by which we can get a good generation for peace, tranquility, and progress of life. So when women are protected, then the society is protected. But because we live in Kali Yuga, we're not protected. And so it's like what to do? What do we do about that? And I think the first step is realizing that our hearts are soft, and that gives us the power of awareness, and then we can shelter ourselves. And we shelter ourselves first and foremost by taking shelter in a bona fide spiritual master and following his instruction. That's the ultimate shelter for Vaishnavis and Vaishnavas. And so that's the first step. And then if we follow the spiritual master's instruction, if we follow Prabhupada's instruction, what he says is to not mix with the sexes except for service, that men and women do not mix. And then he also basically says that it's very challenging today, but that's the ideal to strive for, that's how we protect ourselves. And when men and women mix, then adultery happens and unwanted progeny happens. So Prabhupada says, don't mix with the sexes or get married. And still like, don't mix with the sexes basically. So marriage is this container. It's a safe container for a woman to like contain her pleasure potency, to protect herself, so that energy goes towards one person and doesn't just go to many different directions. And in the Shikshamrita, I found Prabhupada said that this verse I was amazing that he said this, because it so captures exactly what's happening. He says, in Vedic society, no girl was allowed to remain independent and unmarried. Independence for women means they become like prostitutes, struggling to capture some man who will take care of her. Struggling to capture some man who will take care of her. And that's exactly what's happening. It's like we just want to be taken care of. We want to be sheltered. And in this sort of like innocent pursuit for that, we end up prostituting ourselves. And it's really painful. And that's part of my inspiration for talking about this verse, is because I've like really harmed myself the past 12 years because I didn't understand the essence of this verse, and I wasn't taking shelter in a spiritual master, and I was soft-hearted and misled. And even recently, like it's like even while taking shelter in spiritual life, it's still so easy to be misled and to lose like connection to what's most important, to lose connection to those values. So Prabhupada writes that when women, when not with the husband, must live very, very humble and simple life. So that's that's chastity. It's like when a woman is not with a husband, that we are chaste with our energy, not making ourselves all beautiful, and being very humble and living simply. And then I liked this purport in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where basically Krishna or Prabhupada is saying that when a woman is chaste, Krishna is on her side. He says to insult a chaste woman means to bring about disaster in the duration of life. Dushasana, the brother of Duryodhana, insulted Draupadi, an ideal chaste lady, and therefore the miscreants died untimely. These are some of the stringent laws of the Lord mentioned above. So when we are chaste, then we have the power of Krishna on our side, and we're protected. So that's chastity. And then the third quality that Prabhupada talks about is shyness. This one was a little bit confusing for me at first, like why shyness? And then in the purport of Canto 1, Chapter 10, Text 16, Prabhupada says, this shyness is a gift of nature to the fair sex, and it enhances their beauty and prestige, even if they are of a less important family or even if they are less attractive. We have practical experience of this fact. A sweeper woman commanded the respect of many respectable gentlemen simply by manifesting a lady's shyness. Half-naked ladies in the street do not command any respect, but a shy sweeper's wife commands respect from all. So it's interesting because in society today, I feel like women are like what seems acceptable is like being confident, and shy is like, that's considered like less than. And then here, Prabhupada is saying that like a shyness is one of a woman's powers, and that her shyness commands respect. And as I'm studying like man-woman psychology, I'm seeing the same thing there basically. That like when a woman is not shy, as in like, no, I've got this, thanks, or like this kind of like sort of masculine confidence, then it doesn't really give room for a man to like be inspired to step in and serve her and help. And but when a woman allows herself to be shy, it like gives room for that. So it does create that like she commands more respect. So I just love seeing these parallels between what Prabhupada is saying and then what these psychology books are saying. And this was really relieving for me to connect with this part, because I feel like I've put so much pressure on myself to be confident, and when really my natural disposition ever since I was little was to be very shy and to like hide behind my mom and things like that. And so yeah, that shyness, it feels relieving to feel like I can like, oh, I'm allowed to be that, and that's actually like where my power comes from. That like I don't have to like pretend to be very confident, that there can be like a meekness, that power in meekness, a power in humility. And then also it's important that not to confuse this shyness with like passivity in spiritual life, that we have to be fierce in spiritual life. There's a letter that Prabhupada wrote to some of his women disciples. He says, regarding the problem of how to be aggressive on Sankirtan and submissive in the temple, my request to you is that you should go on being aggressive on Sankirtan. He says, no one invited me, even you boys and girls did not invite me, but I came and I preached aggressively, and therefore you are now my disciples. So now you will know, you have to approach the men and women of your country. And it may appear that superficially that you have to disturb them. They're doing their business peacefully and you come and disturb them. Please take this Krishna book. But if you are completely aggressive on Sankirtan, there should be no material aggressiveness and pride remaining. Aggression for the cause of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is pure. If you become completely absorbed in such aggression to spread Sankirtan movement, there will be no question of wanting to lord it over the temple. So we're shy in our like relations with the world, but then when it comes to spiritual life, we're aggressive and bold and courageous. And I don't remember where I heard this, but maybe Melanie told me about it, that like a woman, that Prabhupada said that we can use a woman's beauty also for this. That like one of the ways we can dovetail a woman's beauty is to like attract people to Krishna consciousness. And so that's another area where it's like, it reminds me how like with Bhakti Yoga, it's about dovetailing things. It's not about making things wrong or putting them to the side, but we can use a woman's beauty to allure people to Krishna consciousness, but while also still being chaste and shy at the same time. So at the last sentence of this purport, Prabhupada is saying, he's speaking to men, he's saying, irresponsible men also provoke adultery in society, and thus unwanted children fled the human race at the risk of war and pestilence. So that's also true. So women are responsible, are the guardians of consciousness of society, and then also men, in a sense, are as well. And there's this conversation between Prabhupada and some of his disciples where Brahmananda says, in that sense, we can say that the women are inferior, but the men also, they are not first class. And Prabhupada says, that we also said that there is no first class men. So if there is first class men, then whole question is solved. And then one of his disciples says, the men are behaving just like dogs. And Prabhupada says, yes. So it's all of our job to be first class devotees, to be first class men, to be first class women. And then the whole problem is solved. And in the Shikshamrita, I read a letter where Prabhupada said that basically that if the men become steady in Krishna consciousness, there is no problem. That the duty of male members is to be very steady and cautious. He says this can be done by regular chanting like Haridas Thakur did. Whenever there's a young woman, we should remember Haridas Thakur and beg his mercy to protect us. And we should think that these beautiful gopis are meant for the enjoyment of Krishna. So the story of Haridas Thakur is that the prostitute came to try to allure him away from his vow, and he tricked her. He said, okay, sure, I'll please you soon. I just need to finish my vow first. And so he kept chanting the 300,000 names of Krishna, and he didn't finish. And so he's like, okay, tomorrow, if you come tomorrow, we'll do it then. And he keeps chanting and chanting and chanting. And so she's being exposed to hearing all these names of God, and then her consciousness is purified. She wakes up. She realizes, like, what am I doing? This is not respectable. And she completely surrenders to Haridas Thakur as her guru and begins living a very austere life. And then eventually the people of the community come to her to take shelter in her. So that's like a shelter for men, that men, Vaishnavas, can take shelter in Haridas Thakur when they feel tempted by women. And once again, that I hope it's okay that I bring these psychology things in. I just am so fascinated by them, that what I'm reading in these books and these talks that I'm hearing, it's like for the feminine that the feminine wants to surrender. Like that's what the feminine so wants, is to completely surrender. But in order for the feminine to surrender, well, not in order, it's easier for the feminine to surrender if there's a strong, steady masculine container. And if that masculine container is not there, then it's hard for a woman to surrender to that. And so Prabhupada says, men be steady in Krishna consciousness. If men are steady in Krishna consciousness and they're fixed in their relationship with their spiritual master and serving him completely, then that's the firm container. And that's how men can be guardians of the consciousness of womanhood, and therefore guardians of the consciousness of society. So in summary, Prabhupada's instruction to women is recognize that our hearts are soft and take shelter. And we take shelter by taking shelter in Krishna completely. And we do that by taking shelter in a bona fide spiritual master and following his instruction. And that is the ultimate shelter, because even a husband is technically a fallible soldier. Even a Krishna conscious husband is technically a fallible soldier. And so we take shelter in the shelter of all shelter, the bona fide spiritual master and Krishna, and then we're safe. And we take shelter by following the instruction. And then Prabhupada's instruction to women is to be surrendered, to be chaste, to be shy, to protect ourselves by doing the austerity of not mixing with men. Prabhupada says the ideal is like if we can go our whole lives not being married and just being completely surrendered to Krishna, then that's the ideal. But he says it's not possible today. And so the next best thing is that a woman gets married to a good Krishna conscious husband who has accepted a bona fide spiritual master and is firmly fixed up in his service. And then his other instruction is to see that men see all women as mother and that women see all men as sons. And in this verse, in this purport, Prabhupada says that women need to be engaged. By being engaged in various religious practices, women will not be misled into adultery. So the idea is that the feminine mind always thinks of the beloved, always thinks of the masculine. There's always this space for a masculine to fill, and a woman's mind will always be thinking of that. It's just natural woman's psychology. And so to protect a woman from thinking of that lust or sex, it's a woman needs to be engaged in her service, engaged in these spiritual practices, constantly engaged. And that's what Prabhupada says, that we have to be constantly engaged. But then he says that because that's impossible technically in this age, then he says the chanting of the holy names, Harinama, 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 Eva Kevalam, Kalam Nasteva, 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 Gatiranyata, that in this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the only means of deliverance is the chanting of the holy names of the Lord. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. And so that's how we can be constantly engaged, that when we're not engaged in whatever the service is, the spiritual practices, that we're engaged in the holy name, that's the ultimate shelter. That's how we can always engage ourselves. So the conclusion is for everybody, for men and for women, is to take Krishna. This is a quote from Prabhupada to one of his disciples. Take Krishna as your supreme protector, and Krishna will help you in all respects. Practice this prescription and you will be happy eternally. So that is the divine prescription from the spiritual master, to take complete shelter in Krishna and to just chant the holy names. And then we are happy eternally. So that is my class. Thank you, everybody. And if there's questions, comments. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Brielle. That was a really captivating class. I wanted to hear every single thing you said, and I felt challenged. And I imagine like we all feel a little challenged in our different feminine and masculine balance that we're all carrying around, like, oh, you know. But I'm so grateful for your class, and it's so liberating. These concepts were nowhere in my consciousness. I wasn't raised with concepts of like the bliss of surrendering to a husband or to a spiritual master or to God. Like I didn't have any of that. And I've done so much personal growth work before and there's just nothing like what I've experienced in Krishna consciousness, and also especially in the last few years where I contemplated and attempted to be a much more surrendered wife. And one more comment, like I remember in middle school when it was like time to change from dressing like a child to dressing more like a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like time to wear tight clothes, like tight fitting clothes that were revealing my body. And I didn't want to do it, but it was like I have to, because that's what we're doing. Like that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And when I encountered Krishna consciousness, like as soon as I realized it was like, and I was generally modest all my teen and all my 20s and into my 30s,
Mm-hmm.
but I still had certain clothes that were revealing my body. And anyway, when I finally encountered Krishna consciousness, I was like, oh, I get to get rid of them. Like I just tore them out of my drawers, like tight clothes or revealing clothes. And I was like, oh man, this is always who this is always really who I am. Like I don't want to bring attention to
You were always naturally chaste.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. And so I find it really liberating to be honest about these things, like the soft-heartedness, the vulnerability, the bliss, surrender, and just flipping the whole story and trying on a whole different character is really, it's just so like relieving.
So
and
relieving.
I still have work to do, but I have had some experience in transforming my consciousness. So I'd share a few thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so relieving because that's like that feels like truth. Like this paradigm that I talked about in class today, like it feels like the truth for you. And that other paradigm that we were raised in, like that, like some part of you kind of like didn't really know that you knew it, but like some part of you knew that wasn't like right, that really wasn't how it was supposed to be. And so it's actually like these principles are actually liberating, like realizing that you have a soft heart, realizing that we have soft hearts. That's actually like, yeah, it's liberating. It's not limiting, it's liberating. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really grateful to be giving this class and this topic. It just feels so, like I almost feel like one of the reasons I'm here is to help women understand these principles. Like that's one of the reason I'm here in this incarnation. Like if I look at my past, like my relationship with my dad and my like past 12 years with men, it just seems like that all happened so that I would have that the depth and the drive to like support women in this. And I just enrolled, I think there's 9 women in my group program right now. I'm leading 9 women through a journey of sacred solitude starting next week. And so it feels like just such an honor to get to do this work and help women liberate themselves through these principles rather than be like so enslaved by their own like desire, like misled desire for protection in the wrong places. Rama put a quote. He says, I think the following quote supports your point around the power of chastity. Chaste woman, anyone who sticks to the regulative principles, she gets a power, spiritual or material. He gets power. A brahmachari gets power if he follows brahmacharya. Everyone, if we follow the prescribed rules and regulations, automatically you become powerful. Yes, that's awesome. Thank you. I'm going to save that. Yeah. Anybody else? George, Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much for your class.
Yes.
So my question regards this knowledge of a soft heart, and I guess I'm wanting to know if it means like a lack of emotional intelligence. just kind of as a side, personally, I come from a culture where I guess what comes up for me is I feel like I am open to this verse specifically,
Mhm.
purely because like full trust in Prabhupada and the kind of nuances of my personal life. I come from a culture where the women were bend over backwards submissive to their husbands. Like that is the role, is you
Yeah.
step in line, you know, other cultures, even coming here in America, um, in Philadelphia, where different religious sects, the women will walk like 20 paces behind the husband with the family,
Hmm.
and so forth. And I feel like it's there's definitely a challenge in that Maya poses, where I feel like so many principles can get contaminated, even good, you know, even good
Yeah.
principles, because largely what I've seen is when these, like my parents and other people, other women would come to America, they would still be cooking and cleaning in the kitchen and holding a 9 to 5 job, you know, 5 days a week on top of that. And
Mhm.
so that role of submission never really changed. It's just that they took on more work, I guess, to be culturally appropriate. Or I guess, I don't know, you can't survive in America anymore just being, you know, one person working and the other staying home. And so kind of having Sarasvati now, and it's so interesting, the dynamic of trying to blend this notion of we are spiritual soul. Forget the idea, because that's far away, the idea of like we're all feminine, and I don't even know what that means. Like in the spiritual world, we'll all have feminine quality. That aside, just the notion that trying to see with the eyes of knowledge to whatever, or with the eyes of truth to whatever extent we can, um, and to see ourselves as souls, and kind of masculine and feminine being qualities of our spiritual nature rather than the bodies we are currently. And you know, we had this opportunity to make a little growth chart, like a height, like statural, general body height statural chart for Sarasvati that we put on the wall so we can mark how she grows. And the lady, she was a custom made, and the lady had a boys one and a girls one. And the girls one, just, I don't know, we both, Danielle and I, had so much resistance to it. So we ended up requesting that she do the boys words in the pink font, I guess. And all those words were just like, be courageous, be strong, you know, like, I don't know, it's in the other room. But um, I don't know, like I've always been attracted to women who um, behave unapologetically in their integrity,
Mhm.
courageously, strongly. The girl that I was going to marry before Danielle, she went to a private girls' school, a private high school. And one
Mhm.
of the things that always struck out for me is when we went to college together, that's how we met. Um, she would say that she noted a stark difference between the girls that went to publics general, like I guess combined school with boys, and her friends. Whereas she would be sitting in class, and these guys would be sitting in the back row, just like messing around, you know, teasing, throwing these things, and these girls would just kind of like shyly just take it, or just not.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even participate in class because they were so concerned about what the other role was.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite things that I found so attractive in her is that she would just give it right back to them, like twice as hard, and just like, and they didn't know how to do, because also they had not been used to men who are, or who were very much like unflinching, or like, I feel like I guess my sentiment is that I feel like these principles, while I'm very receptive to them because I do sense there's some truth, I don't know why, I have no realized knowledge, I just have some kind of understanding that there's truth to them, I do see how they could be very much misapplied, just from my personal experience of seeing like so many surrendered women in my life become just so taken advantage of. And like even in my grandparents' generation, so many women, so many men in Albania have died younger, like 50s, 60s. And so I would ask like my aunt or, you know, whoever, I'd be like, oh, so are you going to find another person? And that is the last thing in the world they want to do after 50 or 60 years of being surrendered wives, now to take on another guy who can't like wash his underwear or like make a plate for himself. You know, it's like the last thing in these women's minds. So I feel like, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you could I don't know, give a example of what you mean by soft-hearted, like is it emotional intelligence? And then my other comment was that it just feels like so much of these principles, while I do feel like there is value and strength in them, and obviously I trust Prabhupada, I feel like there's so much because of illusion, because we're so, everything here is contaminated. It's so easy to misappropriate these ideas, these even as cultural or traditional ideas separate from religious principles.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for your sharing. I hear that you feel disturbed by how people misapply these principles, and that women end up going maybe to passivity or weakness and like allowing themselves to be taken advantage of. And it seems like that was really painful for you to see that happening to your women family members. And so you're like not, and then you're also disturbed by like, it seems like like society's different conditionings of men and women, and how like maybe men are encouraged to be strong and women are not encouraged to be strong or something like that. So I think what you're talking about is that distinction between being surrendered and being like not weak. Like I think they're not the same thing. Like I know they're not the same thing. Like being surrendered is not the same as like being a doormat. It's like there's a subtle distinction there, and it's like a delicate distinction. But like I think of the true definition of humility is knowing one's role. And like, I mean, for me, I know my role is not to like be mistreated. That's not my role, and it took me experience to learn that. But that, yeah, a woman's role is to be surrendered, but that doesn't mean to be weak, which it seems like that's what you saw. And in answer to your question, the soft-hearted nature, like what I think Prabhupada's talking about is, emotional intelligence. That women, because the heart is soft, and that soft heart so much just wants to be sheltered and protected, that like in the pursuit of that shelter, women can like they can get fogged over. Their intelligence can get fogged over, and they can make not the best decisions for themselves, particularly when it comes to men, that they can be easily misled. So I do think that he's speaking about emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I appreciate your distinction between weakness and surrender. And I also think that the ability to navigate that subtlety usually is grounded in like what our philosophy is. And we always say everyone's following a certain philosophy. And the biggest difference that I'm making now is my life philosophy and the life philosophy of all the women in my past in these countries, whereas the philosophy was misidentifying rather with the body. Like we are these people in these bodies, and we function in this way because this is our tradition, our culture. Whereas now mostly I'm trying to find like the new philosophy is I am spirit soul. And I could have been man, woman, like, I don't know, a million times alternating, you know? And so I'm trying to find out, like, based on this new philosophy of identifying as spirit soul, like, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for baby girl over there? It's like, how do I kind of like, how do I have her or teach her to navigate that subtle distinction between weakness and surrender in a way that is in line with our new philosophy, that we're not Greek, Albanian, Mediterranean people or whatever. We're spirit souls that could have been alternating so many different ways, you know, like, and like,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah.
I think that's the distinction. That's it. That's the exact distinction, is like, why are like these women in your family surrendering? They're surrendering because they're identifying with the body, and they're thinking that like that's just what women are supposed to do. But from this context that Prabhupada is giving us, it's like they surrender because like they're in the body of a woman, and that's like where a woman's position is safest, and she does that because the whole purpose is to love and serve God. Like that's the context. That's why, like, this, it's varnashram dharma. It's this system of meeting ourselves where we're at, like honoring the limitations of the physical body, the subtle body, and doing that in a way that brings us closer to Krishna. And so it seems like that's the philosophy switch you're talking about, is like from it being about, oh, like we're women and we're less than, so like we should stay 20 steps behind the men, to like, no, like I'm in a spirit soul in a woman body, and I have a soft heart, so let me take shelter in a Krishna conscious husband and in a spiritual master. And so it's like that context is, maybe that spiritual context is what's missing, and that's it seems a distinction for you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Keith, and then Eze.
Yeah, first, I remember when I was probably like 7 or 8 years old in school, like how deeply this impulse to want to be the protector. There was this one girl that I had a crush on, and we would sometimes I would imagine that the school would be burning down, and then I would carry her, taking up in the door, you know. So it's just so natural to want to take that position.
Mm-hmm.
But also, on another note, like what you're saying about that, the fact that the Varnashram Dharma, the protection is not there. The men were like low class, not so intelligent, not so self-controlled, and all that. And that's it's actually one thing what I think is interesting about the new Lord Chaitanya's movement and the benefit of Kali Yuga, you know, because everything's becoming so degraded and confused, like all this gender role confusion and all that stuff. And I think the benefit of it is that, like, kind of like what George was saying about like now we don't have to we have to approach the situation from a spiritual paradigm and not be dependent on religious structure and institutions, right? So then I have to be able to open awareness of what my nature is as a man and my specific nature as a person, and be able to approach that to see what my inclinations are that are favorable or not favorable for spiritual life. And I have to learn how to navigate that. And I think it's actually it's superior to really the way the old Varnashram would have been already established, and we were just kind of like going along with it, you know, because like, I know, like, for example, like the demons are inside of us now, right? So it's like I have to really learn how to establish that and live in the world like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually more superior, you know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of like a little jumbled in the way that I'm explaining it, but the main one confusing thing that I have, though, is like, if there's no established system on how to approach for marriage and stuff like that, and then we have this soft-hearted nature, and then the guys are have tendencies to, you know, the women are trained in our society to spill that energy out and not have it contained, and then the guys were trained to like be attracted to that, and I'm just I'm confused. Like I kind of get it, and I don't want to play into that, but also I have that inclination and you know that impulse, and I'm just confused as to how to go about it, right? If men and women are not supposed to mix,
Yeah.
then and how are you supposed to make things happen, right? You know?
Yes. How are you supposed to get married in a truly dharmic way if men and women are not supposed to mix? That's essentially your question.
Yeah, like Ram and Sita, they had this swayamvar, right? The kings, they had that. It was like a very controlled thing, and they would, and everything was like.
There's a system, a clear system set up, and you're like, "There's no system today. What do I do?"
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Kind of that, I suppose, out of everything that I'm saying, that would be more the question.
Yes. And I also was hearing you say that, like, my interpretation of what you said before that is that men today in Kali Yuga have this like particular challenge and opportunity of like having the demonic nature within and like needing to figure out, like cultivate like a really deep strength to not be overcome by sex desire, and that there's somehow like an opportunity there for men to be stronger today, even though because they're more challenged today. And in response to your question, you know, I'm still figuring this out myself, to be honest. So I'm not sure I have like a realized response. But I think what Prabhupada gave us is to not mix with men and women, to not mix together except in the temple, and that the temple is a neutral zone, and that when a man and woman wants to begin associating, the process is to associate in the temple, to like to start doing like Bhagavad Gita classes together, and then that way you get to know someone, you begin associating with somebody in that way, like in a Krishna conscious setting, like you serve together, basically. And then through that service together, you get to know one another, and then you work towards marriage together. So that's the limited understanding that I have. But if Dear Govinda or Mother Malini has a better response.
I have no response to that. I appreciate your presentation and this discussion. Thank you, Brielle.
Yes.
Just want to add, just consistent, just to support everything discussed here. In chapter 10, verse 34, Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, Bhagavad Gita specifically describes intelligence as a feminine quality. So I think that's an important reference and principle as a foundation for this discussion. Related to where you started your class, there's different types of intelligence. And I would say in terms of what's in the modern day called emotional intelligence, there's from the late 80s, there's a series of books called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. In that definition of emotional intelligence, I would say on average, the female form has more of it. And then you described a sort of emotional intelligence due to soft-heartedness and compassion being susceptible to be misled. In that regards, on average, women need to kind of like they're susceptible for men with ill intent, and so that's where the main principles in treating women that we get from Prabhupada are respect and protection. Protection, and then as many have described, then that becomes misused, misapplied. There's a saying that nothing nothing is so simple that it can't be misunderstood. So respect and protection, that's basically, and then in that respect, in that environment of respect and protection, the spirit soul in the woman's body naturally thrives, flourishes, manifests, contributes. And then respect in the name of protection, there's oppression and exploitation, which obviously is the opposite of respect and protection. So I just want to emphasize that point, that because we can read a purport like this and have a narrow perspective causing so much misunderstanding. At the same time, Bhagavad Gita specifically says intelligence is a distinctively feminine characteristic. So you say, oh, that's a contradiction. And then you resolve that contradiction by emphasizing that clearly the Vedas are talking about different types of intelligence.
Yeah. So when you say intelligence is feminine, is it kind of like how Radharani is the potency and Krishna is potent? So like Radharani is the intelligence and Krishna is the intelligent, like that?
I wasn't thinking in those terms, but that's a fascinating direction to go with the conversation.
Okay, because I'm trying to understand how, because in the yin-yang philosophy that I've learned, like intelligence would be like a masculine quality. So it's interesting that it's saying that intelligence is feminine.
Yep. So that's a question for further research. So what does Bhagavad Gita mean when it says intelligence is distinctively feminine quality? I mean, I have some ideas, maybe some realization based on what. Yeah.
I have a speculation. If the spirit souls are naturally feminine and the perfection of life is to be devotional, then that would be really intelligent and feminine to serve God. I don't know. I'm trying, you see what I'm saying? I don't know if I said it clearly, but it just seems like, yeah, like to be a servant is just the most intelligent thing, and to be, to surrender and be loving, like, because love is naturally like, being affectionate and loving is natural for a woman more than men, maybe. I don't know. Like you were saying with emotional. Anyway, I'm just speculating about the qualities of women.
Thank you. Eze, you had something you wanted to share?
Yeah, we were having the conversation around soft-heartedness, and in the last two verses of the chapter, which are just a couple verses ahead, Prabhupada references soft-heartedness again. So in one, he's talking about when Arjuna is not wanting to fight, he's like considering, he doesn't want to fight his family, and he says, in one purport, he says, all these symptoms are due to soft-heartedness resulting from his being a great devotee of the Lord. So there he's including soft-heartedness as a quality of a great devotee, not simply a quality of a woman or a mundane woman who's not a Vaishnava. He's referencing soft-heartedness as a great devotee. And then in the last verse of the chapter, he says, such a kind and soft-hearted person in the devotional service of the Lord is fit to receive self-knowledge. So there he's connecting soft-heartedness with kindness.
Yeah.
Those qualities being conducive for self-realization. So I want to share that about soft-hearted.
You're very expert at finding the like distinctions, like the things that seemingly contradict one another. Yeah, my understanding is that like soft-hearted, it's like yeah, I mean, the woman has a soft heart, and then the greatest devotee has a soft heart, and it's like there's two edges, there's that double-edged sword of the soft heart. It's like one edge is like the benefit, which is having the potential of being a great devotee, like having that kindness, that compassion. But then the other edge is like being able to be misled. So I think like the quality that's being written there is the same, but it's just talking about the different edge, the different side of the coin of that quality. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Because the same discussion applies to Arjuna. you know, again, because there's, let's say, feminine and traits generally ascribed to the feminine and the masculine in all of us, and that's there in Arjuna. So his soft-heartedness, Prabhupada is appreciating it. That's the Vaishnav heart. A Vaishnav is soft-hearted. Vaishnav hard-hearted. And at the same time, the other side of that razor's edge, the other side of that fine line, is due to a soft-heartedness. Arjuna was being, in that first chapter, Arjuna was being sentimental. He was being sentimental at the expense of acting for the highest transcendental good. So he was being misled by a soft-heartedness.
Yeah.
That's a shortcoming.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, Prabhupada appreciates his soft-heartedness, shows he's really such an amazing Vaishnav, and the soft-heartedness is a symptom of that. They're both true.
Mm. Thank you.
Hi, Krishna, I have a question. One of the things that you touched on was men and women not mixing, which sounds like, so not mixing outside of the temple room, that's what I heard. So it sounds like there would be no space for like a friendship to develop. Unless you're doing service together, you have no business getting any sort of interaction whatsoever. So, I mean, can you speak to that a little bit? Because it sounds very restrictive. I mean, in my mind, I think maybe like if we are viewing each other seriously as spirit souls and not as a man body and a woman body, that there could be some, you know, association through like a shared human experience and understanding that, okay, we're in bodies and you're in a man body and I'm in a woman body, but we're spirit souls. Mm-hmm. And so not associating on a man-woman platform outside of the temple room as friends who are devotees supporting each other seems supportive. And I mean, naturally we see Dear Govinda and Malini have some association together and they're always doing service, but I mean, they do have a friendly affection. Obviously there's some natural companionship that comes from knowing someone for so long. Mm-hmm. So I guess, and like I've seen Kalia and Malini, you know, interact together. So I'm like, what is the Vaishnav association here when we're talking about outside of the temple room? You know, is it when we're only doing kirtan, like doing certain book distribution, or is there some like, you know, is there something I'm not getting? Because it seems very restrictive to not have any male friends as a woman, or for a man to not have any female friends.
Yeah, it feels restrictive for you. It doesn't you feel like it would be more supportive to be able to have spiritual man friends rather than to not be able to have spiritual man friends? And what would spiritual friendship with a man look like? Like that's it within this like Vaishnava etiquette context. I think that so first Prabhupada says, like at least into what I read in the Shikshamrita, what I read is that he says it's not possible in this age for men and women to not mix. Like that, it's just not really possible. And then at the same time, I think I remember him saying like men and women shouldn't mix, but I didn't tell this to people because they would be resentful, basically, and they would resist that, and then they would be closed to Krishna consciousness. So I didn't tell that to people. Is basically what I read, and but still the principle is there that. Like in the material world, men and women having friendship, even if there's like a spiritual connection, it's like, there's always this gratification between the man and woman energy. There's always a gratification in some way. And I can think about that with like guy friends that I have that like, they're just friends, but there is some kind of like gratification that's different than like a woman talking to a woman or a man talking to a man. And so we can't avoid that. It's like, yes, we are spirit souls and we can connect over our shared human experience, but also we're in these human bodies and we're in the material world that is so trapped and controlled by the sex urge. And so like, we can't ignore that, like, yes, we're spirit souls, but we're not like at that level of Paramahamsa where like, we're not affected by the body's urges. Like we're still in these bodies. So we need to like, be honest and humble that like, yeah, we're in these bodies and we have these urges, and it can be entangling. But then what real friendship is like serving together. And that's what I see between Dear Govinda and Malini, is that their friendship is based on service And my sense, I'm not sure, but my sense is that it's not based on like gratification, it's based on service. And then and with Kalyapani and Malini, my sense is a similar thing. And yeah, with Kalyapani and Malini, I think also it's just like that, you know, I can't really say for sure, but it seems like it's like that friendship that's built within the temple, like from serving together and doing spiritual practice together. Yes. Does that respond to your question?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I want to explore further, because I mean, I don't know what gratification you're talking about, but I find that interesting. I'd like to explore that more maybe, but in my own time. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't want to have to leave the house if George has a guy friend over, you know, that I couldn't be friends with him too, or that he has to leave if I have a female friend over, you know, or that it's some sort of, you know, we have to send Saraswati to a private school because she can't interact with men. You know, it's like, it feels, I guess what I'm saying is it feels very restrictive and also limiting. You know, I feel like each spirit soul that I come into contact with that's serving Prabhupada from a Krishna conscious perspective has some unique wisdom for me in my life, that there's something beautiful about their unique expression. And so limiting myself from those experiences seems like it's taking away versus giving. So I'm really just, I'm in a mood of experiencing, you know, the wisdom of this, and also like, what does it really look like in my
What is a
day-to-day life?
practical application in a way that like doesn't feel like restricting and limiting? I think the example you gave is like, you know, if George had a friend come over, like, I don't think you would need to leave. Like, I don't think that's what it's about. I feel like that's kind of like a fanatic that's like a fanatic,
Yeah.
you know, that's that's not really what it's about. I mean, Bhakti yoga is a process of dovetailing. It's not a process of renunciation. It's a process of dovetailing. So we take these friendships and we dovetail them towards spiritual life. And so, you know, if George has a friend come over, to me, it's more like you dovetail the association so that it's like spiritual association. You have spiritual connection. You talk about God, you talk about spiritual life, you talk about consciousness. So it's not a process of like elimination. And then also we be real that like I mean, I get that you're not maybe fully understanding that gratification element. To me, in my life, it's really obvious that when I'm speaking with a man, like there's just generally like there like tends to be a gratification between the two, and it's hard for there not to be. And so it's just something to be real about, basically, and mindful of. And in terms of like your daughter going to private school, I mean, yeah, I'm not really one to give you guidance about that. Like Prabhupada said, this is not really, it's almost not possible in this age without the structures that we have. Like, you know, I think when people live in like a temple that has a system in place where there's like a brahmachari ashram and a brahmacharini ashram, and there's the elders that help them, I think like it's a much easier to follow within that. And then when we don't have those systems, it's like up to us to understand the essence and principle of what Srila Prabhupada is giving us and taking shelter in his instruction as best as we can.
Thanks for that, Brielle. Yeah, like what to speak of temple systems, in terms of the ancient Vedic system, there were structures in place. It's not just they're not in place now. We can't even conceive what those structures were about and how sublime they are. There is just structures. So the idea, as I see it, is to get, the principle is regulation that will support us in advancement in Krishna consciousness. The principle is regulated association that will support us, not to whimsically neglect regulations that will really support us to control our senses and increase our Krishna consciousness, and neither to like rigidly try to foolishly transplant something from 5,000 years ago to today in some blind following way.
Yeah.
To get the principle of regulation and then use our intelligence and sincerity, it's our responsibility to endeavor to use our intelligence to apply the principle to our circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that distinction, like not artificially transplanting like what was in the Vedic age to today. I think you educated me, that would be rasabas, like these moods that don't mix, like incompatibility. And then that actually can be harmful for spiritual life, not helpful for spiritual life.
Brielle, I really appreciate your class.
And I have a few things I want to share. One is that I really like that the way you presented chastity. And I think what you are sharing about your discussion with Bhakti Lata, where I'm at in my life, I'm on the other side, like sexual energy is not a big deal anymore. There is ages also. It's really important to understand where we are at on the period, because like a 20-year-old girl and 20-year-old boys, they're not going to do too well together.
Yes.
And so where they need to be even more cautious to protect themselves. So like that. And the notion of chastity, of being a quality, of like being chaste, I know at this period of my life is like really directed towards Srila Prabhupada. Like to be chaste to the spiritual master. And what does that mean to be chaste to the spiritual master? And connected with this conversation, like chaste to the spiritual master, like dear Govinda just shared, is to really, and your class was all about that, about understanding the principle. To not like when your first letter was like, I don't want to understand, it's wrong, and here is my opinion, and I'm going to tell you how it's wrong. To step out of that, to come to a place like, no, it's not wrong. I understand the principle, and I accept the principle. And from the place of chastity, of accepting the principles, and I look, how do I apply it in my life? Like personally, I do some things that's really wrong. I meet men regularly who speak to me about their sex life. I do that all the time. One-on-one, and they, like that's what I do. And because I have the protection of my service.
Yes.
Because I am within, like I'm serving Krishna, I know what's my position, I know what's my role. Then in a sense, I'm cautious. I have been cautious throughout the many years that I've been doing coaching with Mel. And you're Mel, like I have Izzy here, and you also do coaching with Mel. Sense from the Vedic paradigm, it's just like, it's out of the Vedic paradigm altogether to even think of that.
Yeah.
Think of like having men revealing about their whatever intimate, whatever life.
Yeah.
And the protection is a service. The protection is like, okay, I'm doing that. And in doing that, I'm in service to Srila Prabhupada. I'm being chaste to Srila Prabhupada.
Yes, yes.
But I look, and in my relationship, like my relationship with Kalyapani came a lot. Well, my relationship with Kalyapani was really around coaching. I did coaching with Kalyapani for 17 years. Knew Kalyapani very intimately. Yeah, and I don't consider that it was a friendship per se. At the same time, the relationship between a coach and a client is so full of different relationships. So we can take that as an example. Is it not friendship? Well, yes, there is so much intimacy between a coach and a client. And at the same time, sense gratification is not part of it, at least, ideally, or like, it's not for sense gratification, it's for self-realization. So that's what I wanted to say. And I really appreciate your class, that you bring home the principle, and after understanding, accepting the principle, from accepting the principles, then we can see how do I apply it to my practical life.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that, because it's true. It's like in coaching, it's like we're coaching men, like sometimes about their sexual marriage life. It's like totally not, it's so not Vedic. But if we understand the principles, then we can apply them. And the principle is to be chaste to the spiritual master and take shelter in his service. Yeah, I really appreciate that line, being chaste to the spiritual master. That was like a pearl for me, hearing that.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Okay. Oh, Keith, okay, we'll just do Keith. We'll end with Keith's comment.
I guess back with Danielle, just the way that I'm looking at these things is that these energies are so subtle and it's just about raising awareness of what the situation is.
Mm-hmm.
These energies and desires and attractions are very subtle and part of really who we are. Like sex energy is an aspect of the soul, so it's like just taking measures to make sure that we're interacting with each other in an appropriate way. And then like, 'cause the way that I'm look at it, like for example, if I'm mixing with women too loosely and engaging in these subtle sex and all that, it may not necessarily be like cheating, but like I think like for the way that I want to look at it for when I get married is that it will like undermine my focus on the marriage and my partner. It's subtle. And then when things get difficult, rather than just being focused on what my responsibility is here, then that can be pulling me somewhere else, you know, or it's like the one they say all the scriptures culminate in always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. So it's like if I'm attached to material world and material things, then that's where my desire, that's where a part of me wants to go. And I think it's like that with the marriage, you know. if we're not recognizing to keep myself out of dangerous situations, like for example, like I know if I'm around a pretty girl, and if I get into a certain space where I'm like within a certain proximity to them, it's just like, whoa, the energy is really kicked up a notch, you know. It's like it just naturally like two magnets, you know. So then I can be aware of those things and make sure to avoid those situations, you know. So make sure to keep my desires and my focus where is most important to me.
Yeah, to be aware of those slippery slopes, and the subtle energies, and so that you can protect yourself and make sure that your energy is focused on Krishna, on chastity. Thank you. Hare Krishna. I never read the verse, which is, I know that's how we're usually supposed to end, so I'll just go ahead and read the verse now. Here we go. When irreligion is prominent in the family of Krishna, the women of the family become corrupt, and from the degradation of womanhood, O descendant of Vishnu, comes unwanted progeny. Hare Krishna, thank you. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, devotees. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.